I want to welcome to the show Matt Lesser. Matt, welcome.
Thank you, Melissa. Been looking forward to talking today.
Yeah, I'm so excited about our conversation about finding satisfaction, about finding purpose. These are all things that we deeply desire, and studies show that most of us are not feeling purpose and connection in our life. And I would love to start off with just hearing more about you and your story, including some of the hard stuff that gave birth to some really amazing stuff.
No, happy to share, and please feel free to ask any questions, and happy to unpack anything. There's no go areas, if you will. Out of college, I when I went to college, I was one of those weird kids that I knew exactly what I wanted to study, and that's what I did, and I didn't veer from it. I loved business. I wanted to study business, so that's what I did. I came out of college, and it was one of those things that I really didn't have a desire to work in my family's business, the business my dad had started, but yet I needed a job. And so that's where I was. And so after about a year and a half of doing that, I went in one day to resign and just say, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to go to graduate school. One of us needs to leave. It's probably not going to be you. You own the business. I don't. And so I'm leaving." And he literally just kind of turned the table on me and he said, "Actually, I'm leaving." And he meant it. And he divorced my mom of 29 years and he left. And on the way out the door, he signed the business over to me. And, as a 24-year-old kid, and literally, I mean, kid, I was a kid. Here I was out of college. I was cocky. I was arrogant. I thought, oh, you know what? I studied business. This is the bomb. I can do
I've
this.
got this.
Yeah, exactly. I got this. And within months, just a few short months, I just unpacked problem after problem after problem. And each problem I unpacked was so much bigger than me that I didn't know where to turn. I didn't know what to do. And the end result became apparent to me within 4 to 5 months. The end result was obvious. This is failing and I'm going down with it.
Yeah.
And I had hired my mom. My mom had worked for me by that point, and I felt trapped. I didn't know where to turn. Yes, I was a believer. I believed in God, and I was walking with Him, but it just seemed like everything that came into my life was so much bigger than even God, and from my perspective. And so I declined rapidly and I didn't know any of this terminology at the time, but I began to have panic attacks. First of all, it was anxiety, loss of sleep, then panic attacks, and then a beginning of a sense of loss of hopelessness and helplessness and hopelessness. The way I describe it is that I felt like I was slipping into this dark pit where there was no light and there was no way out. It was like I was surrounded by this glass wall around me that I could not scale. I couldn't get out of. And eventually got to the point where the only way out that I could see, and I was newly married at the time, the only way I could see out was I need to end my life because no one's going to miss me. First of all, no one understands. No one can get what's going on with my life. And so that was the first lie that I believed, that I'm all alone. The second lie that I believed was the only way out of this is to end my life because, and I realize now that was a very selfish thought. And it was not only that, because it's not the only way out, and the devastation that I would have left behind me for my wife and my mother and my brother would have been even worse than that. And so it was in this pit where I had finally decided the day, the time, the place that I was going to end my life, where God showed up on that day. And then from there on out, it was just one miracle after another. The first was that a dear friend that had gone through this, very successful business person near where I lived, had gone through something very similar about a decade prior. He knew the signs. He knew what to look for. My mom knew enough about what was going on that she's the one who contacted him. And, so she literally took me to meet with him, and I met with him. And at the end of that time together, he never said, "I'll fix it. I'll take care of it." He just said, "I will walk with you through this." And he did. And, the first thing he did is he got me help. I was so out of balance in my mind chemically and everything else that, I didn't know about dopamine, didn't know about adrenaline, and didn't know about all how the receptors in the brain work when they're constantly on the word go, and they're on being fired upon. And so I'd exhausted everything. And so I needed medication and I needed to be completely removed. And I was. for about 9 months. And he's the one who actually met with my new bride. And because, I didn't know what it was to be a husband or anything. And so I thought, well, I got to be macho and act like nothing's wrong. And she knew, she didn't know how bad it was, but she knew it was bad. And so after that, after about 9 months, I then transitioned into counseling, where I spent 6 years with a wonderful counselor. I mean, he was a pastor who felt like God called him to be a mental health practitioner, and he was absolutely amazing. And he wound up meeting with me and my wife actually for about 6 years. And during that time, the business started over, and it absolutely took off. And we started out with 3 people, and by the time I made the very difficult decision to sell it, about 12 years later, we had about 200 lives, and it had grown by about 20x in revenue. And, it was just an amazing journey. All different kinds of problems, but very different problems, and problems that, we learn how to navigate. So that's kind of the history there. And then from there, things just kind of built upon that. So sorry, that was a longer than I anticipated, Melissa.
No, well, and that's how our stories work. I mean, it's not something that can be summed up in a sentence or two. I'm curious, when you look back at your 24, 25-year-old self, what do you wish that he had known then? Not that would have sped up the progress, the time period, because I mean, therapy takes time, the journey takes time. But what do you feel like would have comforted him that maybe would be a comfort to someone else now? Because we just know that suicide rates are just through the roof. I mean, through the roof. I've been in counseling for 15 plus years, and I see it more as far as suicidal ideations. I mean, I deal with that with clients pretty much on a daily basis. I mean, it's really ramped up. And so when you think about what would have been helpful for your younger self to hear, what do you think that would have been?
That's that's a really, really good question. And I've thought about that over the years. It's like, what could I tell my younger self? And, the reality is I'm not sure my younger self would have listened, but, had he listened,
Fair enough.
so I don't know if he'd have listened, but had he listened, 2 things. First, you're not alone, because in that pit, I felt all alone. I felt like nobody understood and nobody saw me. And in the big one, nobody cared. And those were all lies. And so the first is you're not alone. And the second is, ending your life is not a feasible way out. And I guess there's a third, that this too shall pass. And it did. But when you're in those moments of despair and hopelessness and helplessness, you're not thinking about, well, this is just a moment in my life's history. It'll pass. It might be weeks or months, but it will pass. You're not thinking about any of that. You're only thinking about, what? This pit is dark. I can't see a way out. It really hurts. And I just want it to end. So I guess that's the counsel I would give my younger self.
And what do you feel like would have helped him to hear that? Like, maybe, do you feel like it was just being young and like being prideful, or what do you feel like was the wall that maybe kept advice out?
For me, I think just some of my basic wiring. I tend to be hard-headed. I tend to be stubborn, a little bit on the obstinate side at times. Up till several years ago, my life's philosophy was, somebody would say, "Oh, you can't do that." I'd be like, "Oh yeah, watch me."
Watch me.
Yeah,
you're determined. That's the positive part of it. Determined.
Okay, fine. That's a determined spin. That's a positive spin to it. So I have needed throughout my life, if I look at the various mile markers where God has really gotten I've needed that proverbial 2x4 upside the head. So I don't know what could have been said or done other than what happened. People have asked me many times over the years when I've shared my story. Now, for many years, I didn't share this at all. Because I was ashamed. And so I had guilt, I had shame associated with it. And because even when I was going through it, I had 2 kinds of people really that responded to it. One side was guilt, and it was, you don't have big enough faith. What sin are you hiding? What are you, those kinds of things, you just need to believe more. And then the other side was, how can I help? How can I support you? How can I encourage you? How can I pray? And so I honestly, I was confused. And so, because I hate to say this, but the side that was more on the judgmental, condemning side were people of faith. And so I didn't know who to trust. And so therefore I didn't trust anybody with this story.
It's confusing.
And confusing. It really was. And so, so I didn't share it for, well, I'm 49 now. And I think the first time I told this publicly, I was 43. So 6 years ago. And up till then, I would share it more privately. But about 6 years ago was the first time I told it publicly. And the response then was completely different. And it was a faith-oriented audience. And so, sorry, I just got way off on a tangent. What was the question you asked? Sorry.
Well, yeah, I don't really think there are any tangents. What I'm hearing you say is that it can be really difficult to share your stories because there's a lot of shame and guilt with it. I also have suicide as a part of my story, where I too had a plan, I had a date. And for me, like, it didn't feel selfish. It was just, I couldn't see past my pain.
Yeah.
And I just felt so bad about who I was. I too believed a lot of lies about myself. And I know what that feels like. And I also feel it feels embarrassing now that I let myself, I'm air quoting that, let myself get to that place.
Yeah.
But I think all of us, when we believe lies, especially lies for so long, the lies begin to feel like truth, and the truth begins to feel like a lie.
Yep.
And everything becomes so distorted. And unfortunately, in our faith communities, I think it's better in terms of like the tabooness being taken away of mental health. But I still don't think it's recognized that mental health is just health. Yeah. There is a faith element where, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, like the more of the solutions, if you will. But with all of us, it's just like every part of our body, there's a place for health, and a place where it's just sometimes things go wrong.
Yep.
And I think that's what a lot of us just don't understand, is that we can be dealing with depression. I recently came out of a depressed episode where I was having panic attacks and anxiety. And as a healthcare professional, like I knew exactly what was happening, and it had nothing to do with like not praying enough. It was just like, I was in a season of burnout that spiraled into something a lot more devastating. And so I understand that frustration and that place.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. I can identify exactly with what you're talking about. Wow. It's powerful stuff.
Yeah. For you, what helped you to begin to step away from the lies and into the truth? Because I know that journey sounds so simple, but I know that can also take decades to go down.
And honestly, it's been a journey for 20 years. Yeah. It started then, and it's been a continual journey. And the first is that I was paired up with this amazing mental health counselor, and he began to help me early on begin to identify what the lies were. And we talked about it in terms of recordings or tapes, right? Tapes are probably not as popular today, so it's just recordings.
And I had these for a millennial, for the Gen Zers, just go Google that and you'll see what a tape is.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So I had these recordings in my head that I would play, and they were full of lies. And lies of what I believed about me, and more importantly, what I believed about God.
Yeah.
And so what he began to help me identify what these lies were, and then methodically, slowly, but surely, we began to replace those lies with truth. And so what I would say, something like, I'm worthless, I'm a loser, I'm a failure. It's replace that with, I'm of great value. God sent his son for me. I have something to offer. I'm not a loser. I can contribute value in my life. And so, but literally it was for 2 years, maybe it was 3 years even, I kept a journal. And every time I would have a thought in my head, or I'd say it even whispered or out loud of, man, I'm such a jerk, or I'm such a this, or such a that, I would write it down. And then every week, literally it was weekly in my sessions, I would say, he would literally ask, let me see your journal. And so we would talk about, why did you say this about you? Why did you say this about you, or about God? And then we would look in scripture and other ways, and we would just identify what the corresponding truth is. And then again, just methodically record over those recordings, erase those recordings or whatever words are used today, erase them and record new ones.
Don't stream it anymore.
Right. Yeah, just let it push stop. And but even to this day, occasionally if I get stressed, or if I get into a time where I'm down or something didn't work out like I hoped it would, my first response is to go back to, man, Matt, you're such an idiot. And it's like, whoa, wait, nope, that's a lie. I'm not. And but it's tough, because once you're ingrained with those messages in your head, it's difficult to unlearn them, because those are the things that I was taught those messages when I was a little kid, and by people that I don't necessarily think that they were evil, but they just didn't know any better, and so that's what they said.
And sometimes the negative is just so much easier to believe than the truth. And it's not even the positive, it's just the truth. And so this sounds super cheesy, but in the work that I do, I call it a heavenly language. I don't know about you, but I took Spanish as my second language, and it was a no bueno situation. So whenever I would speak Spanish, it just felt really like fake and phony and forced. And I think that's how it feels whenever we say, I'm worthy, I'm chosen. It can feel very fake and phony, because if you say I'm stupid or I'm dumb, that just feels right, because we know all of our flaws and failures,
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with you. And even to this day, it doesn't necessarily feel natural.
Yeah.
But it feels more natural today than it did 20 years ago. And I guess the bottom line for me on that is that I know it's true, because I can see it in scripture. I know what the words of God and Jesus and what they've said. And so I know that is true. And so now when those negative words, those negative phrases come to mind, it's like, no, just stop. That's not true.
Yeah. Our feelings don't always equal facts.
Exactly.
And that's so hard, because the feelings are so strong.
Oh my. Yes, very much so.
Something that you said when you were sharing your story is that with your story with suicide is every feeling comes to an end. There's no feeling that lives forever. And I think that's so hard when we're in a difficult season, or when we're in a good season, hoping that will last forever. Like, there's no feeling that lasts forever. And so it's so challenging whenever we're in the hard to press on towards a healthier, more flourishing season. I know flourishment for you is like a big part of your work now. So what do you feel like it means to flourish, and how do we begin to find that in our own lives?
So when I was beginning to put the pieces together to write my first book, I really believe it was from God. He gave me this model, but it felt incomplete. And there were 4 pieces of the model. It's ultimately wound up with 5. The first layer was diminishing, and these were just representing people that have just kind of given up on life. They don't see a path for them. They don't see a path out. They don't see a path forward. And so they're just kind of checked out, kind of given up. Then surviving are people, they get up every day faithfully, and they do whatever it takes day in, day out to survive that day, whatever it takes to survive that day. They're not thinking about tomorrow, next week, next year, just today. And then striving, for some people, they wake up and they say, I'm tired of this, day-to-day existence. I want to do something to better myself, education, training, skill set, something that I can do to help better my position in life. And then thriving. Thriving were the people that I was talking to time and time again. These leaders, I was talking with these leaders all over the world, and they were telling me their stories about how they built these businesses, and they built them, thinking that they would reach the dream, right, where they'd have discretionary income and they'd have things and stuff and time, flexibility, and they did, and they built those things. But along the way, they sacrificed. They sacrificed what they ultimately found out was what was truly important to them. Things like their marriages, their spouses, their kids. And so I had this conversation not once, twice, but 100 times or more, Melissa, with people literally in tears. And they would say, if I could do it all over again, I would do it so much differently. because of the hurt and the pain and devastation they were experiencing now. And so, but yet these people would be identified as thriving because they had everything that you would say is a thriving life, but yet they were miserable and broken. And so at that point, we could ask you the question, okay, what's beyond thriving? In fact, that was the working title of the book originally, was Beyond Thriving. But when I test marketed it, nobody got it. And so it ultimately became Unsatisfied when less is more. I literally about 6 months before it's probably about a year before I started writing the book, had lunch with a friend. He used the word flourish. And I just said, tell me about that word. And he explained it to me. I was not satisfied with his word, with his definition. So I looked it up, did a complete word study on it, and I just fell in love with the word. So when I talk about flourishing, and that became the top of the triangle, the top of the model, flourishing to me is a living out. It is a living beyond me. It is a living for something that's bigger than me. I have been given, I'm going to give back. I've been invested in, I'm going to invest back. It's a living for something that is beyond me. It's a surrendered life to God. Whereas thriving, if you look up the definition, I found this very interesting. Thriving is all about accumulation of wealth, power, position, status, things and stuff, whatever, all about me. Thriving is all about out. And that so captured me that I'm like, that's it. That's the life. But to get there, you have to be intentional. You have to live a life that is for and with and on purpose. And that was the sadness that I picked up on all these people I was talking with, was the sadness of, I don't even know how I got here. I thought I was doing something for my family and my friends, and yet along the way, they all fell off because I was pursuing something that I thought would bring me happiness and joy and satisfaction and meaning and fulfillment in life, money, and it didn't. And so now these people, oftentimes in their 60s, late 50s to 60s, were just absolutely broken because they feel like they missed the boat, and they literally would say, I don't even know how I got here. So that's just a little, I guess, insight into it.
Yeah, it's devastating when you think about living your whole life to try and capture something. And I'm going to butcher it, but the adage about you get to the top of the ladder, but you realize you climbed the wrong ladder.
Yep. I use that analogy in the book, actually. Yep. Love that analogy.
Say more about that.
So yeah, you just hit it. So it's what I picked up on were, a lot of these wonderful men and women that were climbing the ladder of success, and they'd get to the top and they'd realize, oh, wait, there's a bigger ladder. Or they get to the top and say, wow, this view is nothing like I thought it would be. And how many times do we do that, where we're climbing these ladders saying, okay, if I just get another rung higher, a little higher, I'll get to the top. If I just get there, then I'm going to have it all. Not realizing that when you get to the top, there's a bigger ladder, or there's a different view, or, hey, guess what? The ladder is leaning against the wrong wall. And now, your life may not be over, but you've now just spent a good chunk of your life pursuing that which you thought would bring meaning and purpose, but it didn't.
So what is the solution then for change? Like, I know there's multi-steps to it. But Matt, for somebody who's maybe like, you know what, I thought that this was the path I was supposed to be on, but now my health is suffering, my family is suffering, that this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And every day it's just like, I'm barely making it, living for the weekend or living for a vacation that I never get to take. And every day is kind of, another repeat of the one before.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I wish there was a simple answer. I wish there was a magic formula that I could give. There isn't. It's a lot of hard work, and one word: intentionality. It's about being intentional with your life. I make this statement in my book, and I make it oftentimes in my LinkedIn posts, where, we're given one wild, crazy, and beautiful life, or precious life. Sorry. How are you going to invest your life? And I talk about in the book that flourishing is the intersection of four things in your life. It's the intersection of your passion, of your how you contribute value, what you're really good at doing, and what your calling is. But to get to that, you have to know who you are. And so that's where it starts. The first step to living a flourishing life is you have to know who you are and why you are here. Why are you here in 2023 at whatever age that you are, rather than why not 1923 or 1823 or 1223 or just 23? Why are you here at this time in history? What is your unique calling based on your wiring, your passions, your gifts, and how can you use that to serve and influence the world to make it a better place?
Yeah, I love that answer, but also then I'm kind of like thinking about the person who's like, well, how do I find out who I am? I
Hmm.
think that's like a very simple thing to be like, well, be you. But I think also, I mean, as a society, I think that's really a question that we're scrambling to find an answer to, because I think most of us don't know who we are.
Yeah.
And so what are some ways that you guide your clients and people you work with to find out who they are, their identity, what they're good at, what their calling is?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. In fact, when I was coming out of my depression, one of the first questions my counselor asked me is, okay, who are you? And I'm like, what? He's like, who is Matt Lesser? And I literally just sat there and I finally, and I gave him some, flippant answers. And finally I got to the point that I was really, really angry. And I just said, I don't have a flipping clue how to answer your question.
Mhm.
And it's been a journey, Melissa. It's been a huge journey to answer that question. And so again, there's no shortcut. What the few things that I advise those who really want to go on this journey: number one, tell your story from beginning to end, beginning not to end, but beginning to current. Every detail. And what you're looking for are those mile markers, those occasions where you have some special insight into learning to who you are.
Mhm.
And then the second thing is, I love the use of assessments. Now, use them, and I always give a
Caveat.
disclaimer on that.
Yeah.
I'm trained and I'm certified in about 20 different instruments, and that's what I think it takes, because I've seen, I think, well-intentioned people use assessments in very dangerous ways. And they wind up causing a lot of harm because they'll say things that are, well, you have these 4 letters, therefore you can only do this and you can't do that at all. No, that's not accurate. But what an assessment does is it gives you some insight into your wiring, into your motivation, into again, another piece of the puzzle. What you're trying to do is you're putting together this beautiful puzzle that is you, and it takes all these different pieces. And so, I encourage people, write your story out, take some assessments, answer a
Which
couple of
ones do
basic
you
questions.
like? Which assessments do you like?
Oh, wow. So one of my favorite that's comprehensive is called Live Style.
Mhm.
And it's a 9-factor assessment. It's got DISC and Myers-Briggs, which are 2 of my other favorites, built into it. Thomas Kilman, which is on conflict on engagement, another one of my favorites. Thinking styles, how are you naturally think? I love Predictive Index. I love Enneagram. I love Neo PIR, Phiro B. And again, I don't just love one. I believe that if you're truly on a journey to find out who you are, you have to use several. And then I think it's also just in investing time in yourself and your relationship with God. I really didn't begin to get to the core matters of who I am until I began to create time and space for God and me just to be alone together. I did a lot of talking at him, but then never gave him space to talk to me.
Mhm.
And when I started to create that space for him and say, okay, God, talk to me, he actually does. And it was in those moments that he began to reveal himself to me, but he also began to reveal me to me, even in deeper in ways that I didn't even realize. So, I think identifying one of my favorite exercises is to ask people, fast forward to the end of your life and look back, what do you most want to be remembered for? And I've never heard to this day that they wish they'd had a bigger bank account or more zeros in their investment portfolio. And however you want to be remembered then, start living that way now. And
Mhm.
if your paths don't align now, what's it going to take to align it? So there's just a few
Mhm.
things. So
I love that. And then I think it all comes back to as well that practice of intentionality
yes.
and the practice of practice. I think that that's one of the beautiful things I feel like about getting older is like you realize that you don't have to have it all figured out.
No.
And this side of heaven, we're never going to be fully who we are, but I think it's about understanding more of who we are and who God is. And if you look at the Gospels, especially the way I've read, like looked at the Bible through my clinical practice, is just like what does Jesus say about like boundaries? Like, what does he say about identity? And that's the way of truly knowing who you are, is to know who God is, and to know who God is to know who you are. It's like this like ping ponging back connection where one feeds the other one. And I think the really important thing in that is like that we're not listening to all the lies.
Yeah.
Because it's the lies that begin to distort the truth and keep us from experiencing him the way that we're designed to be. And what would you say, Matt, to the person who's kind of like, maybe like, well, that's great for everyone else, but me, like, there's nothing good in me. Like, there's nothing special about me. I mean, I'm just kind of like a regular person, and I don't have anything good inside of me.
Wow. Well, man, you asked some great questions. That's a hard one.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I would say is, well, some variant of, well, how's that working for you?
Okay.
I'd be a little more,
I like that.
I would massage that a little bit better than that. But, you ultimately want to, okay, how's that working for you? And then secondly, it's like, if that approach to life if it stops working for you, then talk to me, call me, email me, whatever it takes, because I think there's a different path that you could pursue that would provide you more meaning in life, more satisfaction, more purpose. And it starts with beginning to erase over some of these messages that you're listening to that I don't think are helpful for you. They're negative, they're demeaning, they bring you down. And but there's a different message. There's a different message set that you need to listen to and start believing.
Yeah,
So something to that effect.
Yeah, I love that. You're really infusing curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that curiosity disrupts the old way of thinking and gives an open door to a new way of thinking. So I think that's actually like a really amazing answer to think about. Well, Matt, this has been so good. Where can we find you? Where can we get your book?
Yeah, great. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. It's Matthew Prin, Matt Lesser. Find me there. Email is matt@uniquelynormal.com. Website, www.uniquelynormal.com. And my book, Unsatisfied When Less is More, is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and other distributors. So those are just a few ways you can get in touch with me.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.